Tandem HR.
Exceptional workplaces.
Exceptional people.
Hi, welcome to the third quarter webinar here at Tandem HR. My name is Carrie Storzinski. I'm a senior HR consultant. Today we're going to be discussing alternative work arrangements. Now I want to show you a short video that demonstrates the changes in society and the workforce that really have created a need for a flexible workplace, and also some companies that have seen positive results from implementing flexible workplaces in their environment. So I just think that video is a fun way to kick off our webinar here, just to demonstrate all the different benefits that companies can experience from implementing flexible workplace in their organizations. So the agenda today really covers a great deal of material. The goal is to provide you with an overview of alternative work arrangements and hopefully provide you with more confidence to assess your workplace, and also provide confidence to hopefully implement an alternative work arrangement into your company's culture. We're going to talk about the different types of work arrangements and the pros and cons of those. I'll share with you some facts about flexible workplaces in the U.S. You'll learn about a few scenarios where alternative work arrangements have been successful. We'll look at a flexibility map that shows all the different aspects that workplace flexibility touches that you may not think about. Then, of course, there are compliance and policy considerations that we will cover. We will provide guidelines and tips for managers to use when managing a flexible workplace. And then also we'll talk about some factors to consider when implementing alternative work arrangements into your company. Society and the workforce have changed and continue to change dramatically. The needs of businesses and workers are evolving all the time. Just think about the tools that we used to use that are now pretty much obsolete, like the typewriter, paper time clocks, pagers. Even paper is becoming obsolete for those companies that are going green. And technology is really allowing the workforce now to be flexible, allowing companies to implement flexible workplaces at their companies. Our typical work schedules are based on the industrial age, and we are in the information age. Only 17% of American households have stay-at-home parents. 1 in 2 employees will provide elder care in the next 5 years. Women make up 50% of the workforce, and men win 50% of sole or joint child custody battles. So obviously there's different responsibilities these days than there were many years ago, so it really creates a need for a flexible workplace. So we have a great deal to cover today. The goal is to provide you with a better overview of alternative work arrangements and hopefully provide you with the confidence to assess your workplace and then hopefully implement alternative work arrangements into your workplace. We are going to discuss the different types of work arrangements and the pros and cons of each. Most people think of telecommuting when they hear about alternative work arrangements, but there are different options than that. I'll share some facts about flexible workplaces in the U.S. You'll learn about a few different scenarios where alternative work arrangements have been successful. We'll take a look at a high-level flexibility map which shows you all the different aspects that a flexible workplace touches that you may not normally think about. And then, of course, there are compliance and policy considerations that we'll go over. And then we'll discuss some guidelines and tips for managers to manage their alternative work arrangements. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to implement one or more alternative work arrangements into your business strategy. So first, let's talk about the different types of work arrangements. We have flex time, compressed work week, part-time schedules, job sharing, and telecommuting. First, we have flex time. This is when employees pretty much have the freedom to create their own schedule. It doesn't matter when the work is completed, so employees have the freedom to create their own schedule. It can be the same each week, or maybe it'll change each day, or it can change as needed, really what works for the company and the employee. Generally, the employer just sets these standard hours, and then the employee takes it from there. Some of the positives for this arrangement: obviously it provides a better work-life balance for the employee. The employee really can schedule work around personal time instead of the other way around. And the employee is still working the same number of hours, so you're still getting the same amount of work from that employee. And that also leads to lower absenteeism. So since employees have that flexibility, they don't need to call off from work or schedule time away from work to tend to their personal responsibilities because they already have that flexibility. And then, of course, there's some negatives. It may be a little bit more difficult for managers to handle those changing schedules, and it may be a little bit more difficult to supervise those employees that may have different schedules or may work off-site. And it may be more difficult to facilitate teamwork if employees aren't always working together. Maybe their schedules don't overlap as much, or maybe the schedules don't overlap at all. And then next is compressed work week. So this is when employees work less than a 5-day work week. So an example would be 4 10-hour days per week. Employees are still working 40 hours, they're just getting it done in 4 days instead of 5. Or you can have arrangements for your exempt employees over a biweekly basis where they would be working 80 hours total in those 2 weeks. So maybe employees are scheduled for 9 9-hour days, or employers can simply require 10 days over a 2-week period. So employees may choose to work 6 days one week and 4 days the next. And this only works really for exempt employees, because if you implement this for non-exempt employees, you may be paying overtime, which you probably want to avoid. And then the last one is your summertime, or it could be year-round half-day Fridays. So employees would work additional hours Monday through Thursday and then have a half-day on Friday to get their weekend started early. So we'll go through the positives. Again, employees will have a better work-life balance. They'll have additional time away from work. Again, they're working the same amount of hours, so the work time is not being cut. The employer may have a lower facility cost. If the company can shut down for a day or some time out of the week, or maybe even shut down a department, that may lead to lower facility costs. And then again, lower absenteeism, because employees can take care of their responsibilities or spend that time outside of work without having that conflict. And then a couple negatives. If an unplanned event comes up, maybe if you have a compressed work week, Monday through Thursday, and an emergency customer order comes in on Thursday afternoon, you may be struggling to schedule those employees to stay later or come in on Friday, and then you may also be paying non-exempt overtime that you weren't planning for. Next is part-time schedules. A lot of companies use part-time employees at their workplace. This is when employees work less than the standard full-time hours. The schedule can be less than 5 days per week, or the employees can work less hours each day. The positives, work-life balance. Obviously, you can see a theme here. Employees are able to have a life outside of work because of the schedule. And part-time employees can be scheduled as needed. So if your business cycle has highs and lows, part-time employees can be scheduled for longer hours or more hours when the company is busy, and then they can be scheduled for less hours when the company is slower. Typically, part-time employees are less expensive, both in their wage, and also typically employers do not contribute towards the benefits premiums for those employees, so they're a little bit less expensive than a full-time employee. And then part-time schedules is a great way to have a phased retirement. So a lot of times when employees are looking to retire, they may not want to cut off from the workforce completely. They may just want to cut down their hours and have a little bit more time at home. So it's a great way to retain that knowledge and experience for a longer period of time, and maybe even have those employees train a new employee that's going to be coming in to replace them. And then the negatives, obviously there's a little bit more limited hours, and the part-time employees' availability may be limited because they have different responsibilities outside of work, like school or family, so their priorities lie outside of work. Next is job sharing. Job sharing is when two part-time employees do the work of one full-time employee. So generally these employees have the same skill set because they're performing the same job, and generally they have complementary schedules, so maybe one employee works during the morning and one employee works during the afternoon. And then the positives for this, again, work-life balance for those employees because they do have the part-time schedule. Again, part-time employers are generally less expensive. And then with job sharing, you have a backup plan if one of those employees leaves. If you only have one full-time employee and he or she leaves the company, then the company may struggle to cover that work or hire a new person, or even temporarily to fill in for those job duties. So at least with job sharing, you have a part-time employee still there to pick up the slack and at least get part of the work done while we're finding a replacement. And then also the company benefits from having two different perspectives and two different sets of ideas, because you have two employees, so you may have better ideas than just one employee. And then some negatives are it may be difficult to schedule the two employees as opposed to the one employee, and then it may be difficult to coordinate the workload between the two employees. And then it may be possible that there's resentment towards each other. Maybe one employee thinks that he or she is doing more work than the other one, and the other employee is just taking a ride off of what the other employee is completing. And then there may be a possibility of inconsistency. When there are two people doing the job, it may be inconsistent. So managers really need to do a good job with training if that is important. And then it might be a little bit more difficult to train and manage more than one employee. And the last one is telecommuting. So this is when employees work off-site and they're generally dependent upon technology. Then we'll discuss the positives. Again, work-life balance. Employees can experience a better work-life balance in a telecommuting arrangement. It eliminates their commute, so it probably eliminates a little bit of stress as well, and employees have that additional time to do with how they want, either spend it working or spend it outside of work. And then employees that are able to telecommute generally have higher job satisfaction. And then the company can also save money on office space. So the company doesn't need to have as large of an office because those employees are working off-site. And then the work can still be completed during a time of a natural disaster or any type of weather that would prohibit employees from coming into the workplace. So I know a couple of years ago we had that snowstorm in Chicago. A lot of companies had to shut down for the day because their employees couldn't get to work. But if you have a telecommuting policy, employees can work at home and there's no lost profits or productivity. And then again, there's lower absenteeism because employees have that flexibility. Some negatives, there's a little bit lower supervision because those employees are off-site, so it'll take a little bit extra effort on the manager's part. Sometimes employees can feel a disconnect from the workplace, like they're not part of the company because they work off-site. And there may be employee resentment from those employees still working at the workplace towards those employees that are able to telecommute because they think that they get an extra benefit, or they get something that that employee doesn't. And then when you're working off-site, there may be more distractions than there normally would be at the workplace. So we've gone through all the alternative work arrangements, and as you saw, there was a theme of a better work-life balance for employees, and that's just one of the benefits for those employees. And then there's a lot of employer benefits which we may or may not have touched upon. You can attract better candidates. You can attract those top candidates by offering a flexible workplace. So a lot of employees are looking for that, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And then also, you don't have to limit yourself to recruiting candidates just within the commuting area of your workplace. You can look for someone that maybe is out of state or out of your geographical area, and that may be the top candidate for that position. It reduces absenteeism. When employees have that flexibility, they don't call into work as much because they can use those days off or the time off for their life outside of work. These arrangements have proven to reduce turnover. A lot of employees look for these types of arrangement and don't want to go anywhere else where these arrangements aren't offered. So your turnover will be reduced. And it also increases job satisfaction. Like I said, a lot of employees like having these arrangements and they like their job better because they have that flexibility and they're not as stressed. And that ultimately leads to higher customer satisfaction. If employees are liking their job and are more engaged in their job, then they're going to be more customer friendly, increase customer satisfaction. That business continuity, like I said, with the weather emergencies, your business does not have to stop if there is inclement weather. Employees can work at their home and the work can still be done. There's no lost time, no lost profits. Then you can also bring back employees from FMLA or LOA by offering them a flexible workplace. So those key employees that you want to get back to work as soon as possible, you may be able to do that by offering alternative work arrangements. And then employees have reported that their health and wellness increases because they may be less stressed or they may have more time for things like exercise and focusing on eating right. And that ultimately increases your bottom line when it comes to benefits costs. And then also reduces expenses and increases profitability ultimately. And that's the biggest thing that companies are looking for.
So now I want to ask you a question about your alternative work arrangements at work. So we have a poll here. So we're going to pull the poll up, and I'd like you to answer the question, why do you think alternative work arrangements are not offered at your workplace? So I want to know, if you don't offer them, what do you think the hesitation is? So I'll give you a minute here to answer that. Okay, I think everyone is done. So we'll pull up the results here. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people here already have a flexible workplace, which is great. And then the next one is fear that employees will take advantage of the situation. And I do understand that, and that actually is one of the biggest reasons why managers are hesitant to allow a flexible workplace. And then the perception that productivity will go down. Okay, and hopefully as we go through the presentation, we can change your mind on that. Okay, so let's talk about some statistics in the U.S. 45% of employees have a job that is compatible with at least part-time telecommuting. And then during this survey, employees were asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, what they rated the importance of working at home, and 50% of those employees rated it as a 4 or 5. So obviously employees think it's very important. Only 21% said they would not be interested at all, and 37% said they'd take a small pay cut in exchange for being able to work at home for 2 days a week. So employees value the benefit of working at home more so than they do compensation, which is a great way to make employees happy and lower the cost for a company. Fortune magazine reported that 82% of companies on the 100 best companies to work for allowed their employees to telecommute at least 20% of the time. So those companies that all employees are striving to work for offer telecommuting. And then only 2.9% of the workforce consider their homes to be a primary place of work. So even though a lot of companies are moving this direction, it's still taking some time to have the home or telecommuting as the normal work arrangement. But we are moving in that direction. So now we're going to go through a few examples of real life examples. So increasing the bottom line is the main reason to implement some of these alternative work arrangements. We talked about some general benefits, but now I'm going to give you the dollar amounts. At First Tennessee Bank, employee retention was increased by 50%, which led to 7% increase in customer retention for a total of $106 million. The Executive Office of the President has increasingly used telecommuting, which saved over $150 million in just 3 months. So those employees could continue to work during those during the weather emergencies when they were prohibited from coming into the workplace. Arapahoe Douglas Works had flexible scheduling and decreased absenteeism absenteeism by 41.6% over 2 years. Could you imagine how much more work was completed when absenteeism went down by almost 50%? And then last, PricewaterhouseCoopers estimated the cost of turnover to be 1.5 times a departing employee's salary. We all know how much time and energy and money it costs to recruit employees and to train those employees. So they had saved $30 million for every 200 employees retained. So those are some examples with dollar amounts attached. And then I want to talk about the productivity hesitation. There was a Stanford University a Stanford University study which was conducted with 255 total employees who worked for a customer service company. All of the subjects were married, had kids, or had a longer commute. Employees were randomly chosen to either work from home or work from the office, and the study ran for 9 months. And what were the results? The telecommuters took 15% more calls than those working in the office, and telecommuters worked 11% more hours than office-bound workers. And then in addition, telecommuters had fewer late arrivals, took fewer breaks, and took fewer sick days. And the telecommuters also reported that they were in better health after having this arrangement. So this is another example of how productivity has increased because of an alternative work arrangement. Next, we have a flexibility map here, and like I said, this just demonstrates all the different areas that workplace flexibility touches that you normally wouldn't think about. We have talked about a lot of these, and then we will cover some of them in the presentation a little bit later on. But a couple I want to talk about that we don't go into detail about. Workplace flexibility touches corporate social responsibility. So because there's a flexible workplace, employees have additional time to do their volunteer programs and work for non-for-profit companies in their spare time. And then also, employees that have a flexible workplace are in better health, so that creates healthier employees, which then creates healthier citizens. And then diversity and inclusion, you'll have a more diverse work environment because you're recruiting from different areas of the country or the world. And then maybe those employees that would have to choose between work or participating in religious activities. Now they don't have to make that decision. They can do both. Next, we're going to talk about a few points that no matter if you have alternative work arrangements or your standard 9 to 5 Monday through Friday arrangement, all employers have to follow guidelines set in employment laws. So first, talk about non-exempt employees. Anytime a non-exempt employee is working, the employer is required to compensate that employee. And then anytime work past 40 in a given week, that employee must be paid overtime wages. So it's very tempting when non-exempt employees work from home, or maybe they have mobile devices with their email on there. It's very tempting to take a look at that email, respond to that phone call, or complete a project because the work is right in front of you. When you work at home, your home is your office and your office is your home. So you want to make sure it's very clear to employees that they should document all their hours that they're working. And then you want to think about workers' compensation. No matter where the employee is working, it's the employer's responsibility to make sure that employee has a safe workplace. So if an injury does occur at the home or off-site, it may become gray as to whether it was an injury that occurred during work hours or non-work hours. So you want to follow your normal procedures and do an injury report and be as detailed as possible. And then it also may be necessary for the employer to conduct a workplace inspection at the employee's home. Next is Americans with Disabilities Act. Employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations to those employees with disabilities, and a reasonable accommodation may include an alternative work arrangement as long as it does not cause undue hardship to the company. And even if the company doesn't already have these arrangements in place, if an employee requests this as a reasonable accommodation and it doesn't cause undue hardship, the employer may be required to provide an alternative work arrangement to that employee. Next is your data security. You want to make sure that your confidential and proprietary business information is protected while providing remote workers access to this data. Security measures must cover company-owned and employee-owned computers, laptops, and mobile devices. And data security is especially critical if the telecommuter works with health information that's covered by the electronic security rule of HIPAA. So you want to make sure that there's a policy in place to protect that information. And then lastly, if employees are conducting business at their homes or have deliveries sent to an employee's home for business purposes, you may want to consider liability insurance on the premises. So we talked about a lot of benefits, and overall I think it's a great way to increase productivity and profit by implementing these alternative work arrangements, but you need to think, is it right for your workplace? Recently there's been a lot of debate over this. The Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer recently revoked the telecommuting policy, so she's kind of moving in an opposite direction than the rest of the country. But she thought that it was best because some of the best decisions and ideas come from those impromptu conversations in the hallway and cafeteria. So she thought it was best for the company to have all employees physically present at the workplace. So you want to make sure, just like Marissa Mayer did, you want to make sure you assess your workplace and make sure that it is the best option for you and that it works for you. According to a SHRM survey, the #1 reason why employers implemented flexible work arrangements was due to employee request. But does that mean that you have to implement that alternative work arrangement? Absolutely not. Like we talked about, you have to assess your culture and your operations to make sure it's a good fit. But I do encourage you to consider those alternative work arrangements because a lot of the companies have experienced positive results, and you may be surprised by the positive results at your company. So let's talk about a few things to consider. You need to consider the needs of your business. If you have a teamwork-oriented culture, is it okay to implement a telecommuting arrangement? Do you think that employees will still be able to collaborate effectively while working out of the office? Or do you think the company will be able to shut down for a day or part of a day, or shut down a department for a day if you have a compressed work week? And then you can think of implementing alternative work arrangements on a position basis. It doesn't have to be for the whole company. So look at each position individually. Like in a manufacturing setting, most likely those employees will have to be on site, so a telecommuting arrangement is out of the question. But is it necessary to have those employees start at 6 a.m. on the dot? Or maybe it's okay for them to take a 20-minute break in the middle of the day to call their children, make sure they got home from school. Or maybe you have a creative role where you think it's better to have 2 minds instead of 1, so you want to implement a job sharing arrangement. And then you want to look at the individual style of the employee. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Some employees can work on their own off-site or can schedule their own hours and still be very effective, and some just aren't able to do that. So make sure you're able to identify that and have that discussion with the employee. And then just like you can consider these arrangements on a position-by-position basis, you can also consider them on a department-by-department basis. So look at each department and the needs of that department. So if in a department employees are dependent upon each other to start their work after another employee completes their work, it may not be the best option to have flex time because the coordination of that work may be a lot more difficult or impossible. So make sure that you take a look at that. And then also you want to consider individual performance. A lot of time managers are hesitant to give a flexible work arrangement to an employee because maybe they have poor performance at the time. But have you ever considered that maybe the employee's performance is low because of distractions outside of work? Maybe an alternative work arrangement will help improve that employee's performance. And then on the other hand, maybe an alternative arrangement will hinder the performance. So you want to make sure you look at both sides and make sure that the arrangement is working for that employee. And then lastly, you need to analyze whether the alternative work arrangement will fit with the business strategy. Will implementing such an arrangement help, hurt, or keep the status quo of where you want the company to go? Next, we're going to talk about a few policy and procedure considerations. When you're developing a policy, you want to think about when and for whom it is appropriate. So like the manufacturing setting, telecommuting is totally out of the question for those employees. And then maybe for your accounting department, maybe you want to allow a telecommuting arrangement or a flex time arrangement for most of the time, but when you're closing the month or quarter or year, you want all those employees on site so they can work together as a team to close out the month or quarter or year. Then you need to consider the type of coverage needed by employees. So if you have a customer service environment, it's probably not a good idea to have a compressed work week with all of your employees off on the same day. But maybe you can have a compressed work week where the employees choose a day that they're off. And maybe that's chosen on a first come first served basis or maybe seniority basis. Just depends on your culture. Think about how employees can request alternative work arrangements. Is this a formal process? Is it an informal process? How do employees go about that? And then sometimes employers think of alternative work arrangements as a benefit, so you may have criteria to qualify for that benefit. So maybe the employee needs to be at the company for 1 year, or maybe the employee needs to complete his or her introductory period before he or she is allowed to have an alternative work arrangement. Or maybe the employee needs to meet or exceed expectations on his or her last performance review. But remember, if you have these types of qualifications, you may be missing out on those top candidates, or you may be missing out on opportunities to actually improve an employee's performance. Next, you want to make sure it's clear how paid time off is tracked. When employees are absent or have time away from work, it may be unclear as to whether that time falls under the workplace flexibility policy or it falls under the paid time off policy. So you want to determine that beforehand so there's no surprises for those employees or managers. And then again, when dealing with non-exempt employees, make sure it is stated in your policy that those non-exempt employees should be paid for all of their time worked. And then also it might be a good idea to have an overtime agreement where employees are required to request to work overtime before they work it. It may be difficult for managers to keep track of those different schedules or when those employees work off-site. So let's put the responsibility in the hands of employees to request it before they can work overtime. And then also, again, to keep better track of time, maybe you want non-exempt employees to clock in and out in a certain way when they're off-site. So maybe a phone call to their manager or maybe an email or instant message. And you also want it to be clear what happens in case of a power outage or technology or equipment failure. Is it the employee's responsibility or is it the employer's responsibility to get that fixed? It depends on whether whose issue, what side the issue is on. And then also, if it is the employer's fault that there is a power outage or technology or equipment failure, that employee is exempt. The employer still has to pay that employee for the time, even if he or she is not working. If the employee is non-exempt, those employees don't have to be worked, but what happens in that case? Are they allowed to come in later on in the week to make up those hours, or if they're telecommuting, can they still come into the workplace to do their job? Next, your policy should outline workers' compensation. It's probably a good idea to have a policy that states that employers can have access to the employee's home, either to conduct inspections after an injury has occurred, or if a normal inspection is part of the safety program. And then make sure that you have a policy laying out data security and how that is protected. Obviously, there's different people in the employee's home if they're telecommuting than just that employee, so you want to make sure that information is protected. And then lastly, it may be a good idea to have liability insurance, and you may have it part of your policy that the employee is required to maintain renters or homeowners insurance. Next, there's a little bit added effort for managers when managing a flexible workplace. So it's very important that managers keep up with communication. They need to communicate to employees on a regular basis no matter what their schedule is or where they are working. So managers should determine how regular they need to speak with employees. It may be on a daily basis, it may be on a weekly basis, it may be more frequent or less frequent than that. And also, if some employees are working off-site or have a different schedule, if something's decided at the workplace that just kind of is a spur-of-the-moment thing, the managers need to make sure that those messages get to those employees that aren't on-site at that time. And it's very important that managers establish objectives and expectations. That's important in a normal setting and very important in a flexible workplace setting. Employees that have the freedom to do the work how they see fit and when they do it and where they do it, they may not be totally clear on objectives and expectations because they have so much freedom. So managers need to set those before and need to consistently follow up with those employees as well. If the expectations aren't set, employees may just think that they're doing the best or doing a great job because they weren't told otherwise. And then it's very important to manage performance. Sometimes managers get caught up in, well, this employee took a half hour here to take their kid to school or whatever the issue is, but that's the point of a flexible workplace. You have a little bit more trust in your employees that they're going to get the job done, but you still want to manage the performance. If they aren't doing their job, that's a problem no matter when they're working or where they're working. So you want to focus on performance and maintain those conversations, have those informal performance reviews on a regular basis along with your formal performance reviews. Then you want to make sure that all employees have opportunities to training. You want to make sure that you're developing your employees that are telecommuting or have different schedules. Just because they're not at the workplace, they shouldn't be excluded from these training opportunities. And then lastly, employees need manager and group FaceTime. Technology allows us to communicate in different ways, which is great, but there's nothing like that face-to-face time. So I think it's a good idea to make sure that employees come in once in a while to the office if they are telecommuting, or schedule a time that works for all employees and make it mandatory that those employees attend those meetings so everyone can see each other face-to-face. And then lastly, let's discuss some things to think about when implementing alternative work arrangements into your workplace. You want to talk to different people in different parts of the company. What your department does may affect another side of the company, which you may not be thinking about or you may not be aware of. So you want to make sure you get different perspectives from different people. Then you want to design a plan beforehand. When it's going to be rolled out. Who is it going to be rolled out to? Those types of things. And then you want to develop a communication and training plan for managers and employees. So make sure that everyone is aware of their expectations and their responsibilities up front. And make sure you train your managers and employees on the policies. There's going to be some rules associated with alternative work arrangements, so it's important that managers and employees are aware of those. Then you want to determine metrics to evaluate success. You want to make sure that you are tracking this so you know if it's working or not working. Like in the example with the Stanford University study, they tracked the number of customer calls and the amount of hours worked. So you want to develop a metric like that so you can start that from the beginning and track it to see if it's working for your workplace. You want to determine accountability. Who is responsible for what? Who is communicating the plan? Who is managing these employees? Who is setting the schedules? So just make sure everyone knows their responsibilities up front. And then I strongly recommend to do a trial run before implementing to the entire company. It's a lot easier to adjust or even revoke the alternative work arrangement if it's done on a smaller scale in a temporary basis. So try it out and adjust it and see how it goes before you roll it out to the entire company. And then make sure that feedback is constantly given so you can make the arrangements better and make your workplace better. So make sure employees are providing feedback and managers are providing feedback along the way. So remember, although there are great benefits for alternative work arrangements, you need to make sure that it's the right fit for your workplace. It may not be the right fit, but in a lot of cases, it can provide positive results. There are benefits for employees and great benefits for employers. Alternative work arrangements are not just a work-life balance benefit. It has a lot of positive impact on the company's bottom line. Then you want to make sure you have a policy in place so everyone has a clear understanding of what is expected and what the rules are surrounding alternative work arrangements. And then you want to have those managers be consistent with their managing no matter whether they're in the workplace or working outside the workplace or have a different schedule than the manager. And then again, have that continuous feedback where employees and managers are always talking to each other and making sure that you're improving upon your alternative work arrangement and adjusting as needed.